Let us get on. So I'm Judith Richards, and I am truly blessed to be here this afternoon. I'm in Queensland. Rosemary is in Sydney. Rosemary Boon. May I introduce Rosemary Boon? Rosemary is extraordinarily experienced in the areas of neurofeedback, EEGs, etc. Rosemary, would you like to just tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. Thank you, Judith. It's an honour to be with you. And thank you very much for the training I received under your care. I'm an educational and developmental psychologist. I have worked in the field of EEG and neurofeedback since 1996. I went looking for something to help my clients with trauma and PTSD, and that's when I very synchronously bumped into Judith at a conference in Sydney in 2014 and did her training in February 2015 and have never looked back.
That's right. I was presenting at a conference then, and we met in that very crowded room.
It was. I was just fascinated by Judith saying that she could resolve trauma and PTSD with her method and do it very quickly. So that piqued my curiosity, and I needed to find out more. So, you know, a few years down the track, I still love the process and I've had lots of success with it, as have lots of other practitioners that have trained with Judith. So I'm also a nutritionist, and background was school counselling and special ed teaching, so that's where I've been.
Right, and Rosemary's business is Learning Discoveries in Sydney. And when I'm very soon into our connection, Rosemary, you were explaining to me that you can actually see in an EEG when someone has PTSD, when someone has serious trauma that they've gone through. It changes brain function, and you can actually see it in the EEG, and that just blew my mind. I thought, this is fascinating stuff. Tell me more. And I'm looking forward to coming and playing in your rooms with the EEG machines, etc. I'm really looking forward to that. So can you just step us through? I have in the background here some slideshows that Rosemary has sent me. And so I'll be directed by you, Rosemary. If you want to talk about something first, just tell me when you need your slides.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think we'll start with talking first, and
sure,
we'll go through from there.
Sure.
All right. So I'm just going to move us across. Oh, hang on. How do I minimize this?
No, you don't. If you want the slides, you ask me for the slides.
No, I need to see mine on the other side. I need to see my one. It's all right. Okay, it's all right. I can move us. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
I've got it.
Good on you, Rosemary. Okay. You've got it. Is it contagious? Yep.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All right. So we all know that trauma, traumatized brains differ from non-traumatized brains.
How?
They differ in very predictable ways. There's an underactivation of the thinking center, an underactivation of the emotional regulation center, and an overactivated fear center. And this often translates to a bottom-heavy brain, which means that the lower, more primitive regions of the brain, the subcortical areas, including the fear center, are high, while the higher areas of the brain experiencing underactivation, such as the thinking and the emotional regulation centers, are hypoaroused. When you're hypoaroused, you feel spacey, zoned out, numb, frozen. Your body wants to shut down. It's not something you choose to do. These reactions just simply take over.
So does this explain the craft that's experienced with trauma? Can't remember a flippin' thing because it's just shut down.
Well, we'll go to some slides in a minute. If you would like to bring up that normal information processing.
I can do that.
If we can do that, we'll just go through parts of the brain to start with, and then we'll talk about how trauma affects memory later on.
Okay. So I am bringing this up. Stay tuned. So can people see this? Can you see that, Rosemary?
I've actually lost all screens, so I can't see anything at all.
Okay, it says how trauma affects the brain.
Okay, that's fine. I want normal information processing and PTSD malfunctions in the brain. Okay?
Normal
So
information processing. Here we have it.
So we've got the prefrontal cortex, and it's normal. The normal part of the prefrontal, or the normal functioning of the cortex, is to do complicated thinking, to make decisions, to regulate your behavior. So it stops impulsivity and hyperactivity and excess motor function. But in a traumatized or a PTSD brain, your thought processes are totally dysfunctional. You're not capable of making decisions. You're inappropriate. You have incredibly inappropriate responses to situations. And people look at you and say, gee, that was over the top. Why was that over the top?
Yeah.
So then you come into the limbic part of your brain, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala. Mm-hmm. The hypothalamus is the one that's responsible for releasing hormones like cortisol, our wonderful friend, to help manage and direct the efforts of the stressor. But in a traumatized PTSD brain, the hypothalamus becomes so hyperactive, it leads to an imbalance in hormone levels, cortisol increases, and it just basically can't shut it down. Then we talk about the hippocampus, which is responsible for memories and particularly making new memories. In a normal brain, the hippocampus transfers and stores information into memories. It takes new memories and consolidates them into long-term memory. In an OCD brain, unfortunately, it stores memories incorrectly and affects memory retrieval. An OCD brain and a PTSD brain are quite similar. Some things have to be done in a ritual. And the amygdala in a normal brain sets off the fight, flight, or response to danger. In a PTSD or traumatized brain, however, this fight, flight response is there all the time. It's continually turned on. It's like the amygdala hijacks the whole of your frontal lobes and doesn't allow you to even have any sort of rational thought.
No. I likened it when I was in the throes of extreme PTSD as having the accelerator and the brake pedal to the metal 24/7.
Absolutely.
And there's no respite.
No,
in extreme PTSD. And of course it's a spectrum.
Of course. Yeah. So now we can go to our brain circuitry slide.
Sure.
Where we can have a look at the sensory motor cortex, which is responsible for sensory motor functions. But in PTSD, the provocation results in increased activation. And the thalamus, which is your grand central relay station, has a decreased blood flow. They call it cerebral perfusion. The anterior cingulate cortex, very, very important in autonomic functions, cognition, direction of attention. But in PTSD, because of its reduced volume, and this is how stress and PTSD change the actual structure and function. If you change the structure, you will change the function of that particular part of the brain.
Can you just say that again, Rosemary? This is so important, that the structure of the brain,
if you
the structure of the brain actually changes with trauma.
It changes with trauma, and once you change the structure, then you will change the function. Mm. So because the anterior cingulate cortex has a reduced volume under stress and under continual chronic stress, which is PTSD and reactivation of those networks, it has a higher resting metabolic activity, so it's using up more and more energy. Hence the fatigue that comes in a lot of PTSD.
Yeah.
Yeah? I'm sure, Judith, you would relate to this.
Yes.
Then you've got in the Parahippocampal Gyrus, which is important for memory encoding and retrieval, normal function, you can store new memories. But when you have PTSD or lots of stress, there's a stronger connectivity to the medial prefrontal cortex because of its decrease in volume. So there's another change, morphological change, if you like, and it changes its function. Then we come along to the amygdala. Conditioned fear, associative learning, which is its normal function. We are all born with a startle reflex, with a Moro reflex, and as we grow older and we grow up normally without too much trauma, then that will transform into a postural or adult startle reflex. But in PTSD, the amygdala, as I said before, hijacks everything, and you have an increased responsiveness to anything, not just to the traumatic and emotional stimuli, but to even normal stimuli that approximate that emotional stimuli.
Yeah, so even just loud noises or
Could be a bang, could be a shot, could be a car crash, whatever that traumatic experience was that the loud noise was associated with. Yeah, it's because it's hypervigilant.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex, as we said before, is responsible for cognitive thinking and emotional regulation. It regulates your moods. Because in PTSD you have decreased grey and white matter density. So grey matter is the actual cells, the number of cells, and the white matter are the connections, the axons. So because both of those are decreased in density, you have a decreased responsiveness to trauma and emotional stimuli. So that's how sometimes people just freeze.
So that's really important. So the actual mass changes.
Yes.
The grey matter, and could you just say that again, Rosemary?
The grey matter is the number of neurons you have. They're the neuronal cells. And that decreases. The white matter, and that decreases. As does the white, if you have fewer cells, then you're going to have fewer axons. So you're going to have a decrease in grey and white matter density. And the axons covered with myelin, which is a fat, allows the transmission of neuronal impulses from one neuron to another. When it gets to the end of the dendrite, into the synapse, then it becomes neurochemical.
So what is the outcome when you have less grey matter and less white matter?
You have less responsivity. You have less ability to respond. Okay,
so you get that flat line.
A flat affect, if you like.
A flat affect, which to me is, there was a famous saying from the First World War, with the soldiers, they had the 1,000-mile gaze.
That's it. You could see it in their eyes.
Yeah, and the connection to the vagus nerve and the regulation and the running of all the facial muscles, and it just shuts down, so you get this flat.
Yeah, totally. It's that numb. It's that, inability to arouse itself to its normal state.
That's great.
Then you've got your hippocampus, conditioned fear and associative learning. In PTSD, there's an increased responsiveness to traumatic and emotional stimuli. And all of that is linked to that fear response, which is an evolutionary survival response. We're all born with it. But in times of stress and PTSD, we become incredibly sensitive and we generalize that fear. And we can't extinguish it. And that's the problem with PTSD. The fear never goes away.
And any little movement
will trigger it.
And that absolute hypervigilance, where's the danger? Where's the danger?
Exactly.
Where's the danger?
Exactly.
Thank you. That's great stuff. I'm loving this.
And that's why, people with PTSD have difficulty with sleeping.
It's not safe to go to sleep.
No, it's not safe.
Hello?
Safe. Yeah, exactly. It's not safe. That's the bottom line. I'm not safe.
That's right. The whole being screaming, I'm not safe.
I'm not safe.
And where's the danger coming from?
Well, it could be something really simple like the wind rustling in the trees.
Yep, that's terrifying.
Yeah, for some people it is.
Yeah. Okay,
so then we've got, so I've just done
the next one?
The next slide, PTSD relevant brain areas.
Okay.
So I've just, for those of you that like tables, here's a table.
Lovely.
So the hippocampus, you have reduced volume and plasticity. And remember, the plasticity is a double-edged sword. You can have good plastic changes, which is growth and development, and then you can have negative plastic changes where you're stuck. The emotion or the trauma has been so bad, it is a negative plastic change. And our job as therapists is to get that brain unstuck.
Right.
Okay. So exaggerated activation, inability to terminate the stress response, deficit in verbal memory, inability to extinction fear conditioning, and can't discriminate between what's safe and what's not safe.
Because everything's not safe.
Everything's not safe. Nothing is safe. And we come to the amygdala. There's no clear evidence for structural alterations except that when you have a look at the EEG, you will have incredible increase in beta activity. So that will be that hypervigilance, that hyper-responsiveness to stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
But also to neutral stimuluses faces, not just stressful stimuli. Then you've got
everything is a threat.
Everything. Yeah.
Everything is seen through that filter.
That lens. Yep.
Yeah. Everything's a threat.
Then you have your medial prefrontal cortex, and as we talked before, decreased volume, the anterior cingulate, and the orbital frontal cortex are also correlated with severity of symptoms. So it isn't just the decrease in the volume, but also the anterior cingulate and the orbital frontal cortex. And if you have decreased reactivity to exert inhibitory control over stress, then you have decreased emotional reactions. So you have this numbing. I don't feel anything. The anterior cingulate is usually under functioning. You see that when you do an EEG and you analyze it and you look at the Loretta coordinates, you'll often see under functioning in the anterior cingulate, which means that there's a decreased sensory awareness and bodily integration.
Ah, so this is the dissociation from body.
Correct.
So in my own experience, I could not feel my body. I remember the night where I thought, what's that under my foot? And I actually felt the floor with my foot, and I started to feel things. So, yeah. So that's a normal part of it with this change.
And then the insula is under functioning, and when the insula under functions, you can't change your strategy response. If you're put into a new situation, the insula is the one responsible for switching to a new strategy, but you can't do that if you're stuck. And if the insula is under functioning, you can't switch. You can't try something new because you're stuck in this one mode of responding.
That explains a lot.
Okay.
It's like a scratched record.
Yes. Same, you're in a different situation, but you're playing the same song.
Yeah.
The sensory motor cortex, there's no evidence of clear, structural alterations, but there's an increased reactivity, which makes you hyper-aroused when your traumatic stimulus appears again. And there's a saying in neuroscience, neurons that wire together, fire together, wire together. So the more you replay traumatic events, the more hypervigilant you are, and the less you can turn it off, the stronger that connection becomes. So exposure therapy is not really a great way to deal with PTSD.
Because that's neuroscience 101, isn't it? The neurons that fire together, wire together. So to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Rosemary, but my understanding is that the more someone talks about it, the more someone's taken into that experience.
Absolutely.
That more neurons come and join the superhighway, and it becomes a physically thicker, more embedded trauma. Absolutely. Is that correct?
Absolutely, spot on.
Okay, so this is, because I've had a number of people who've gone through exposure therapy who are in a very bad way.
Yeah.
But even that talk therapy, tell me again.
And they've told their story, 19 times because they've had 19 different therapists. And all that does is reinforces the network and reinforces the trauma.
And leave somebody feeling worse at the end of the session.
No one can ever help me. See, I'm still the way I am when I walked in the door.
And I'm, in fact, feeling worse because we've just brought it all up again.
Again, yeah. And I've had no way to deal with it the previous 19 times, and I still can't deal with it at the end of the session.
This is really, really, really important, isn't it?
It is. So exposure therapy is not the way to go.
No, because it goes against neuroscience 101, the basic understanding of how the brain functions. And that's why in TRTP we don't get people to talk about this story.
No.
Okay.
Right, so...
You need the next one.
Well, not yet.
Okay, sorry.
The hippocampus, just very quickly, in animal studies they found that stress has an adverse impact on the hippocampus. The prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and the hippocampus is involved in declarative memory, learning, regulating emotion, and motivation, and it's very, very sensitive to the effects of stress. When you look at the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that's the brain area responsible for regulating emotional responses triggered by the amygdala. And the ventromedial prefrontal cortex regulates negative emotions such as fear that occur when confronted with specific stimuli. And in people with PTSD, there's a marked decrease in the volume of this area, which affects functional ability.
Okay, so the structure actually changes. It gets smaller.
Yes, it gets smaller. And this is why people suffering from PTSD and trauma tend to exhibit fear, anxiety, and extreme stress responses, even when they're faced with stimuli that are not connected or only remotely connected to their experiences from the past.
Mm.
Yeah?
Right.
And then you've got the impact of trauma on the amygdala. And brain imaging studies show that PTSD patients have an increased amygdala reactivity during fear acquisition, which of course is responsible in regulating the fight or flight response. This begins when the alerting sensory environmental information reaches the brain and enters the amygdala, the operation center of the brain responsible for the activation of the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, and activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And Judith, you would know all about that.
So what does that mean in real life, Rosemary?
In real life, it means that you have no time to rest and repair.
No.
The autonomic nervous system is divided
on
into two
all the
sections.
time.
On all the time. The sympathetic gets you on and pumping, and the parasympathetic is for rest and digest and restore. But you're never off. You're always on.
And this is why there's so many, gut problems are so associated with trauma, because your gut's shut down.
The gut's shut down.
Because you don't need to digest breakfast when you're running away from a dinosaur.
So if you're always running away from a dinosaur, whether you are or not, or your body thinks it is, the amygdala is on all the time, then digestion can't happen properly.
Yeah.
The enzymes that are needed for it don't happen. Your gut bacteria is all disturbed, by the way.
Yes.
That affects it as well.
Yeah.
So, stress acting through increased excitatory amino acids, decreased brain-derived neurotropic factor, or increased glucocorticoids is associated with a loss of branching of neurons in the hippocampus and an inhibition of hippocampal neurogenesis. In other words, in stress, if you're in constant stress, your hippocampal cells cannot regenerate. You can't produce any more new hippocampal cells. And we know that the hippocampus can regenerate. It was the first part of the brain that we found out could actually have new growth. Studies show that exposure to early childhood abuse is associated with smaller hippocampal volume, and this could actually result in depression. In addition, cortisol responses are great provokers for PTSD and amygdala volumes. Mm-hmm. So then you can come to the next slide. I think you've got this one. Traumatic stress effects on the brain, decreased serotonin levels.
Brain networks affected in trauma?
No.
No, okay. There's impact of trauma on the amygdala.
We've done that. Decreased serotonin levels. There should be a diagram.
There's lasting effects of trauma on the brain showing long-term dysregulation.
Okay, I'll just read it out then.
Okay.
Okay. So if you have decreased serotonin levels, and they've been identified in PTSD sufferers, that disturbs the dynamic relationship between the amygdala and the hippocampus, removing its capacity to reduce anxiety and contributing to increased vigilance, impulsivity, and the intrusion of memories. Both corticotrophin and norepinephrine have increased activity, which contributes to analgesia, dissociation, numbing, and exaggerated stress responses. So this is your neurochemical sequelae of trauma.
Okay, and it results in that numbing?
And numbing. Exaggerated response, that hypervigilance, because norepinephrine is a excitatory neurotransmitter. Right,
so you have a small stress and you respond with great stress. Or
exaggerated responses.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Norepinephrine, now along with dopamine, is also responsible for the physiological effects of PTSD, such as increased pulse and blood pressure, startle response, and levels of arousal. They have a negative effect on fear conditioning, comprehension, and response of fear, memories related to fear. So the more you have of norepinephrine, the less sense you can make out of the memories related to fear. Does that make sense?
Now so this is part of when there has been really major trauma that you can't really piece together exactly what happened.
No.
Is that what you're talking about here?
Gaps in your memory.
Yeah. like there's that bit and that bit and that bit, but
and we don't know which one came first, and we don't know how to put the pieces of the jigsaw together.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
So neurohormonal systems that act on the brain areas to modulate PTSD symptoms and memory include not just glucocorticoids, but norepinephrine. And glucocorticoids affect learning and memory. Elevations of these glucocorticoids within the physiological range result in deficits in memory function in animals as well as human subjects. When glucocorticoids are released during stress, they are thought to act through the hippocampus, which may explain in part the acutely reversible as well as chronic effects that stress has on declarative memory.
Okay, so there's a big impact on memory.
Huge. And it's not just declarative memory.
Can we go to the high trauma impacts for different types of memory? Can I bring that one up?
Yeah, bring that one up.
Because we're just running a little bit short of time here. Okay.
So
step us through this.
You've got explicit memory and implicit memory. Mm-hmm. So explicit memory is divided into two areas, semantic and episodic. Semantic memory is the memory of something in general knowledge fact. This is a bicycle. Mm-hmm. Right? You remember what a bicycle is. And how trauma affects that is this. Trauma can prevent information like words, images, sounds from different parts of the brain from combining to make a semantic memory. The temporal lobe and the inferior parietal cortex collect information from different brain areas to create a semantic memory. And we know that the temporal lobes and the parietal cortex, because it's part of the default mode network, are affected in trauma. So therefore, trying to get that semantic memory together and piece it together can be quite difficult at times. Then we have episodic memory, which is kind of like an autobiographical memory of an event or experience, including the who, what, and where. As you were saying, Judith, I can't remember what happened. You remember who was there and what street you were on when you fell off your bicycle in front of a crowd, but that's about it. You don't remember anything else after that. Yeah. Trauma can shut down episodic memory and fragment the sequence of events.
And is this what happens with early childhood trauma when someone can't remember anything under when they were 12 years old?
Absolutely.
Right, okay, because that's fairly...
responsible for recate. Yeah, right. The hippocampus is responsible for this part of episodic memory.
Okay, all right. And then we've got
we go to implicit, which is emotional memory, the memory of the emotions you felt during an experience. When a wave of shame or anxiety grabs you the next time you see your bicycle after the big fall. And how trauma can affect that, and the amygdala is the part that is working in this area. Mm-hmm. Key role in supporting memory for emotionally charged events. In fact, the amygdala is responsible for one-time learning. And you put for example, one-time learning, you put your finger on a hot stove, you'll never do it again. One-time learning. After trauma, a person may get triggered and experience painful emotions, often without context, because that amygdala is hypervigilant.
Yeah, because it just comes from nowhere.
No, exactly. And then you've got procedural memory. You forget how to do something that was quite, automatic to you and is a muscular memory. Even that's forgotten. So this is the procedural memory that allows you to automate something like driving, for example. When you first start driving, it's very difficult to listen to the radio and to check your mirrors and to, look side to side and look ahead and put your indicators on. By the time you've driven for 25 years, you can do an automatic pilot. You speak on, fix the volume on the radio and do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can ride a bicycle automatically, etc. Trauma can change patterns of procedural memory. For example, a person might tense up and unconsciously alter their posture, or could even lead to pain and numbness. And this is why people with trauma say to me, I never used to be like this. I used to be able to stand up straight, but I can't seem to straighten myself up anymore.
Yeah.
And the striatum is associated with producing procedural memory and creating new habits.
Mm-hmm. And there's a look of trauma.
There is
that contracted.
It's they shrunk into themselves, and you can tell.
And it's
the look in the eyes,
and it's the stooped and looking. There's a particular look. Yeah,
there is.
Can we go to the EEG?
So you want to do the lasting effects of trauma on the brain?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. So dysregulation of norepinephrine and cortisol systems, just to finish off this part of neurochemistry.
Yeah, sure.
And vulnerable areas of the hippocampus. So you've got your medial and orbital prefrontal cortex, extinction of fear through increased dopamine. Mm-hmm. The amygdala's conditioned fear response. You've got CRF, you've got ACTH, you've got norepinephrine. So you've got all of these areas working to increase your heart rate and blood pressure when you have long stress. So high blood pressure and BP are problems for people under stress. What did you want to go to now, Judith?
Yeah, if we could, I'll just stop sharing this, Rosemary, and if we could go to the fascinating stuff.
Hold on, I've just got to get rid of this. I've got to get rid of my one.
That you sent me of an EEG before someone's done TRTP and then after.
Oh, okay, yep.
Because this is just...
you can bring that up.
Just a second. I'm just bringing it here. Share.
People know what an EEG is and a quantitative EEG. A quantitative EEG is very different to a clinical EEG. Clinical EEG is usually run by a QEEG tech. It's looking for, sleep abnormalities, head injury, epilepsy, those sort of things.
Okay.
But a quantitative EEG is basically looking at the background EEG. And we collect it, and then we run it through a normative database. So we're not relying on the eyes of a QEEG tech. We're actually running it through a normative database. And the database I use is from children as young as 2 years of age to adults as old as 72. So it's
pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, it's a normed reference database. So you have a look at this brain compared to normal brains for that age, for that sex, and for that handedness. Handedness is quite important when you look at a quantitative EEG. Okay.
And so this person, a male, 49 years old, with Asperger's, high-functioning autistic spectrum disorder, a traumatic brain injury, early childhood PTSD, anxiety, reactive attachment disorder, and poor personal relationships. Tell us what we're seeing here.
Okay. So
Fft Summary Information.
So this is a Z-score. Z-score is simply standard deviation. So normally 2 standard deviations is considered clinically significant. So you're either 2 standard deviations above or you're 2 standard deviations below. That's the basis of, or you can be more, but that's the basis for it being clinically relevant. So anything above 2 or below 2 is considered significantly, clinically significant. So we've got different brainwave bands. We have the delta from 0.1 to 4 hertz, theta from 4 to 8 hertz, alpha from 8 to 12, beta from 12 to 18, and then high beta from 18 to 30 in this particular database. As you can see on the left-hand side, we've got massive amounts of red. That's your prefrontal cortex.
Is that the brain injury?
That was the head injury.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And we know that the temporal lobes and the frontal lobes are very, very vulnerable to head injury because the temporal lobes, for example, are encased in bone. It's got bone all around it. When you have a coup contre coup, which means you get hit on the front and your head hits the back, or you get hit on the back and your head hits the front, so you get a coup contre coup, or you get hit from the side, those parts of the brain are particularly vulnerable. Changes in memory, changes in personality, changes in affect regulation, all associated with those sorts of injuries. Okay. So you can see that that's not only just the head injury, and then you can see on this side the orbitofrontal cortex with decreased activity. Okay. So it can't do its job of regulating properly.
Okay. Yeah? Shall I go down further?
You can go down further. Amplitude asymmetry is where we look at homologous sites. So we look at the left prefrontal cortex and the right prefrontal cortex, the left temporal lobes compared to the right temporal lobes. And you can see that the asymmetry is all over the place. There's too much asymmetry on the left-hand side, particularly from that brain injury. Yep. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty obvious, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. So if
then we come to no, stay on that.
Okay.
Just show me coherence. Coherence is simply connectivity. It's how connected those parts are. If there's not enough, if it's blue, there's not enough connectivity. In other words, there's a lot of talk going on, but not a lot of work. So the brain areas are not connected. They're not communicating well. And phase lag is how fast you process information.
Okay.
And when people get overwhelmed, the information just comes through without any processing happening at all, which is what you see in the red. In the blue,
Okay.
in the blue, you're taking too long to process information from the frontal to the central to the temporal lobes. Yeah.
And the red, it's just overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed.
Just too much.
Too much
information.
to process. Too much coming in too fast. It's coming in, okay, but nothing's
It's
getting
not
processed.
being processed.
No.
That makes perfect sense. Shall I go down?
Yeah, now you can go down.
So this is post-TRTP, the third session, 3 weeks after completion. Brain normalizing, as can be seen, increased green indicated normal activity. Less dysregulation in amplitude asymmetry, power in the left and right hemispheres, coherence, so that's that connectivity of brain networks that you just spoke about, and phase lag timing. Right, okay.
Although much more was needed, consistent with his head injury.
Yeah, so he did have that head injury.
While the TRTP did a lot of work for the trauma, it didn't do a whole lot
for the actual physical injury.
Exactly. So that's actually not too bad, considering we had
where it was before.
Brain. Yeah. And this is no neurofeedback, by the way, no change in diet, no addition of any drugs or anything. This is just 3 sessions.
Straight TRTP.
Yep, one after the other.
Okay.
So you can see the difference in asymmetry.
Okay, going down to the asymmetry,
yeah.
See?
All that stuff, stop for a second. All the stuff that we had here on FP2 has moved. So that horrible red stuff that we had coming down from that left frontal lobe has disappeared. Now we have to work at the back at T6, which is always dysregulated in PTSD. Coherence has cleared up, except that we've got massive amounts to clear up here with his head injury, and that's when I would do neurofeedback with him to clear that up. And the phase lag, we've just got a whole amount of theta to work out at the back of the brain, consistent with this TBI. But you can see that the coherence and the phase lag are much improved.
Right.
And that was after just 3 sessions.
That's fabulous.
Nothing else.
So that was where you got to from, if I just go back to, from this. I mean, it's quite a different picture, isn't it?
Yep. So we've cleaned up most of this.
Right.
Okay. So we've got lots of coherence to work on in the theta band, but that's in conjunction with this TBI. Okay. And he never did come back for neurofeedback because he figured he was doing well enough.
He went off on an overseas holiday, didn't he?
He went off on an overseas holiday, ended up with a new partner. He's talking to both of his ex-wives and his children.
A huge difference in his life.
Yep, 3 sessions.
Massive difference in his life. So do you want to talk about this, or are we done?
No, I think we're done. We've got others to talk about, if you like.
Okay. So
where would you like to go?
I'd like to go to some questions, if that's okay. I
was just going to finish off with what I wanted to say.
Sure, Rosemary.
If that's okay with you.
Sure, of course it will.
Just as to how I found this quite an empowering process for people with PTSD. Because the constant replaying of elements of trauma and that triggers the accompanying stress simply engraves those memories deeper and deeper. Neurons that fire together wire together, and research from neuroscience tells us that there are multiple circuits involved in PTSD which lead to different states of mind. Therefore, a one-size-fits-all approach to treatment will at best be minimally effective. And psychological interventions that focus on insight and understanding do little to manage the symptoms of PTSD. When the limbic system is in alarm mode, no amount of insight will silence it.
Okay, so people understanding what's going on doesn't change anything.
No, it doesn't allow them to cope.
No.
The limbic system is on fire. You have to somehow soothe it. You have to get yourself back into parasympathetic-sympathetic balance.
Mm-hmm.
So, knowing what to do but not being able to do it is the problem here.
And that's the thing.
I know what I have to do, but I just can't do it.
Yeah. And if only everything would work properly. Why am I like this?
Mm-hmm. So for strategies to be successful with clients for trauma, the critical balance between the three brain networks, the default mode network, the salience, and the executive control networks need to be addressed. And the connection between the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, the balance between the amygdala, the medial prefrontal cortex shifts so radically, resulting in decreased activity in the frontal region, so people literally take leave of their senses. Two ways to manage stress is to regulate from the top down or from the bottom up. Bottom up recalibrates the autonomic nervous system with breath, movement, touch, drama, particularly Shakespeare, and touch as in particularly massage, so in particular reflexology, or top down.
If people can bear to be touched, can I just say, I couldn't bear anybody to touch. Do not touch me, I will lash out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And the top down is you strengthen the capacity of the watchtower to monitor bodily sensations, so hypnosis, mindfulness, yoga, neurofeedback.
And in terms of mindfulness, when you are in complete hyper-aroused, it's physically impossible to meditate or to do mindfulness.
Correct.
Challenge.
Yeah, so our challenge is just that.
Yeah. And so what you have found, what you have found is these big shifts, like as you just showed in that EEG printout, just from 3 sessions in TRTP, and the changes in life experience are huge, like that man.
Yeah, but he was ready to change. I have to say that. I have to predicate it by saying he was definitely ready to change. In fact, his children and his wives got onto him and said, "You need to do something." And that's when he came down from Byron Bay.
Yeah. So, as the great philosopher Seneca said so many years ago, it's part of the cure to wish to be cured.
Absolutely.
You have to be ready to change. Nobody can change anybody, but when somebody is ready, and that's a great prerequisite for TRTP.
Absolutely.
So, can we go to some questions?
There's just one more thing to finish on. So the challenge of trauma treatment is not only dealing with the past, but also to enhance the quality of daily life experiences for clients. Therefore, we need to help bring those brain areas back that deserted them when they were overwhelmed by trauma. And what your process says, the Richards trauma process, it's a top-down approach to resetting brain areas hijacked by trauma without clients having to repeatedly relive the process whilst placing them firmly in the present moment. Now we can have questions.
Yeah, and to me, it's like a factory reboot on the phone.
Absolutely.
If anyone's done that, but you do it on the brain.
Yep.
And the changes, when somebody is ready and when someone throws themselves into it, the changes are quite extraordinary. So some questions here. Angela's talking about psychedelics. Resetting the brain. Are we going to go there?
Absolutely. No, we can go there. I mean, I don't know a lot about them, but I've heard of a lot of there's a lot of research out there for things such as ayahuasca and stuff like that do a fabulous job in resetting the brain. But with everything that you put into your body, it's invasive chemically, it affects the brain, it depends on how great your brain is and your ability to detoxify as to how soon that actually leaves your system. So it is invasive, it is not without risk. But
my concern, because I've
got to have somebody help you through that experience because you purge everything. So
well, my concern, because I've never even had a puff of marijuana, because I was always concerned that I'd go into psychosis and I'd never come back.
And there are certain brains that are predisposed to psychosis.
I'm very aware that my brain's a bit iffy, a bit. It'll go there.
Absolutely.
So that's my concern with those.
A TBI brain should never go on ayahuasca. A person with severe PTSD, I don't know, I'd be very, very cautious because we know that a lot of psychosis from just marijuana. There are certain brains who end up in a psychosis just from dope, and they call it drug-induced psychosis.
And they don't come back.
They don't come back.
And that's why I never had any, because I thought I'll be one of those. Okay, let's go back to some questions up here. Rod Freer, yes, there'll be a recording of this. Are the brain changes reversible? Yes, of course they are. The brain changes in trauma can be changed back, as we have just witnessed with this gorgeous man who was then able to get a life and go overseas and connect again. Because there's the thing with trauma. A big part of trauma is you cannot be in protection mode while you're in connection mode.
Correct.
So when you're in protection mode, you just can't connect. So when that quietens and disappears, well then, like this man had connection then with his children, etc. If someone is 70 and all this danger from damage from early childhood sexual abuse ongoing, is there any hope for change with TRTP? Yes, Karen Lantella, all the time. We have people who've been through the most extreme childhood trauma and abuse and neglect, etc., etc. It says sexual abuse, violent abuse, psychological, every type of abuse. And yes, of course, they what happens, it's like a factory reset from the phone on the brain. And the whole system goes from screaming, I'm not safe, to it's over and I'm safe now. Let's just try that. Let's just, the great trauma experts, Van der Kolk, Levine, etc., say the body has to know it's over. Well, I'll go further and say the unconscious has to know it's over and I'm safe now. If we could just say it together, and just say it wherever you are, even either in your head if you're in public or out loud. I'm just going to say it's over, and just feel what happens in your body. It's over. And just observe that. And let's do it again. It's over. And just observe it, just feel it. And now it's over and I'm safe now. You ready? It's over and I'm safe now. And once again, just observe. It's over and I'm safe now. And there is resolution. And we have worked with, people who are most extremely traumatized, and their whole system goes from that hyper-aroused state of fight, flight, freeze, I'm not safe, to and the brain recalibrates. Something happens. It's over and I'm safe now. And the symptoms disappear. Can I put to you that the symptoms of PTSD obviously are from trauma? But can I put to people here as well that the symptoms of anxiety, of depression, why am I anxious? Because my system's going, I'm not safe. So I catastrophize, etc. Why am I feeling I'm not safe? Because of dreadfulness that's happened in the past that has not been processed by the body, because my brain has changed. As Rosemary's gone into such rich detail about how those changes happen. So anxiety is a symptom. It's not the issue. It's a symptom of dreadfulness that's happened that has changed what's going on. Depression, it's people in that shutdown freeze mode. The anxiety is fight, flight, hyper-aroused. The depression is the shutdown freeze mode. Why? Because of dreadfulness that's happened that hasn't been processed, that's changed my brain. So just take away that dreadfulness and the whole brain recalibrates, and that's what we witness again and again, and there's more new messages here. Do you have anything to add to that, Rosemary?
No, I think we just about covered it. Unless you want to take another question.
Yeah,
we could go on for another 5 hours.
We could go on forever. What if a client uses drugs or alcohol to self-soothe and attends therapy, not able to connect to their body? Tracking bottom-up approach. Safety is very important. I understand retreatation. Well, if someone's doing a lot of drugs or alcohol, go to rehab first. Get clean first. And unfortunately, in rehab situations, the trauma is not dealt with. We have one guy, you can look him up, Matt Nettleton. He was on the streets as an ice addict at 13 and worked his way up through all the drugs, went to jail, dreadfulness. He went to rehab 17 times and failed 17 times, and nobody ever asked about his pain. He's very engaged now. He's a TRTP practitioner, very engaged with the trauma approach to why are you actually doing this? Because of dreadfulness that's happened. Heather, are these EEG machines like the one you use quite affordable for others who may want to use them in clinical practice? Can I just say no? It takes so much training to do what Rosemary is doing. You can't just go to the shop and buy an EEG machine and be an expert. So no. Heather, what happens with someone who has dissociative disorder and multiple personalities? Just talking, David Clough, who's one of our practitioners, recently worked with a man with over 200 personalities. And that man is really, really well now. And dissociative disorder, there's all different types of dissociative disorders, but it's all the same thing. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly talk about what happens when we have a distressing event. Let's take away the word trauma, because we think war and emergency services, but some houses are war zones. Let's talk about distressing events. We have a distressing event, the amygdala fires, the emergency services is in the brain, and we produce, as Rosemary has said, the cortisol, the adrenaline, etc. And it floods the brain, and a lot of the brain shuts down because we don't need to do higher maths while we're running from a dinosaur. The hippocampus shuts down. What happens is that memory, that event is not stored in long-term memory and the door shut on the warehouse of memory. Instead, it's stored like a videotape loop. That's the only way I can explain it. A videotape has been the unconscious. It's happening now. It's happening now. The Black Saturday bushfires are happening now. He's coming at me with a knife now. I'm in the car accident now, and they're cutting me out of the car. I think I'm dying now. Whatever it is, it's now. And so what happens is you've got that event from when I was 3, 6, 12, 15, 23, 20, and the distress builds up like the pressure in a balloon, and then it blows out. And if it's a catastrophic event, it'll blow out into PTSD. If it's less than, it can be just the straw that breaks the camel's back, and that pressure just blows out, because you can only put so much pressure on an organism. It blows out into anxiety, into OCD, into depression, and can I just say into fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, etc., or into other physical illness. Something's got to give. So what TRTP does is it doesn't focus on the anxiety or the depression or whatever it is. It focuses on the dreadfulness that has happened, those videotape loops, and turns them off. And the person goes from I'm not safe to it's over and I'm safe now. The gut problems disappear, the symptoms disappear, the nightmares disappear, the panic attacks disappear. Whatever it is, the symptoms disappear. So that's what happens. What's the link between the default mode network and trauma, stress, depression? We don't have time to go into that. Is there an EEG picture of dissociation?
Not at the moment. I haven't got one up here. But no. If you back channel, if you send me an email, then I can find one. Don't know if it's going to mean anything to you, but yes. Where if I'm person to be ready to change for the better, what to do to help that happen? Okay. B. Nesta, what to do to help somebody to be ready to change? Well, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But generally, a lot of people want to change. Thanks for amazing information, Karen. I just need to know if EMDR is exposure therapy. No, it's different from exposure therapy. Asking because I was considering it because cost is covered, but just want to know. I was working with someone today who did, with one of the top EMDR people in the States, did 5 days intensive of EMDR for her extreme PTSD. And it did help for some months, but it didn't last. And TRTP, yep, she's completely well now. So that's what TRTP does. So it's just gone 501 in Queensland, 601 down south, and various other times in Nevada and Mauritius, etc. So we'll finish there. Nearly right on time, Rosemary. I think we did really well.
It's so easy to just go on and on and on. For those who are interested, there were some questions in there about the training. For those who are interested in looking at possibly training in TRTP, I'm telling you a couple of things here that we have to do something different, people. There's a tsunami of pain out there, and what we're doing is taking too long. It is not so effective. And like Rosemary was saying, Neuroscience 101, you keep talking about the problem, you keep experiencing the problem, and more neurons come and join that neural superhighway. It doesn't work. This is why cognitive behavioral therapy, etc., takes so long. If you are interested in looking at the TRTP practitioner training, because this is not just some little process. We will change how mental health is done. We have our own research teams looking at the research. Some of that will involve Rosemary, of course, with EEGs before and after TRTP. We're really looking forward to that. But with all of this, we're looking to change how mental health is done so that people are stepped through to the other side of their pain without re-traumatizing.
That'll be good.
And without the discipline of having, we don't manage symptoms. Can I just say, we don't manage symptoms. The symptoms simply disappear. We don't teach people how to deal with their panic attacks. The panic attacks disappear. We don't teach people how to deal with their sleep disorders. They just disappear. If this calls to you, come and join us and have the people who sit in front of you be truly healed rather than teaching them to deal with their symptoms. We turn off those video tape loops and the symptoms of anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, etc., PTSD simply disappear. I suggest that you go to the richardstraumaprocess.com. That's our website. On there, on every page, there's a button to press to make an appointment for a conversation. Let's see if you are a match with us. It's not for everybody. We don't accept everyone who applies. Come and join us. There's too much pain. People don't need to be in this pain. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. If you're interested, just type in interested and we'll get in touch. That's probably the fastest, easiest way to do it. Just interested, and we'll get back. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Karen. Just a quick interested if you're interested. We don't want to harass people. We just want to change the flippin' world just because we can. Hey, Rosemary.
Absolutely.
One person, one family at a time. So where TRTP came from, just very quickly while we're waiting for people to type that in, is just from my own journey through extreme PTSD. So I had an extremely traumatizing life, ending up being tortured, cut up over 9 years. My son was sold into a pedophile ring from when he was 4 till when he was 12. We know about trauma and we know how to fix it. So it's just based on personal experience. Come and join us and let's fix people instead of teaching them how to be disciplined in looking after and managing their symptoms. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Rosemary Boon from Sydney. Welcome. Thank you so much, Rosemary. Let's do some more of this. It was just fabulous. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
I hope it was informative.
It certainly was. I always learn from you, Rosemary. Fabulous. Thank you.
Good to be here. Take care.